Hello and welcome to this sponsored session at the annual meeting of the Society for Scholarly Publishing 2021. Today we'll be exploring data-driven transformation using the Dimensions platform, part of digital science. First, a brief introduction to me. My name is Tyler Roos and I am Director of Publisher Solutions at Digital Science. I've been here for more than 4 years, working with our publisher team across all of the digital science portfolio companies with a special emphasis on Dimensions. Previous to digital science, I had roles at Ingram, R.R. Donnelley, and OCLC, so a variety of different roles across the publishing lifecycle. I work remotely in Boulder, Colorado, and did before the pandemic, and will do so after the pandemic. You can contact me at t.roos@digitalscience.com. So the theme for my presentation today is reflecting on the last 15 months and what impact the various aspects of the COVID-19 pandemic have had on scholarly publishing. I come at this through the lens of a data analytics provider who talks to many different publishers of all shapes and sizes who operate in a wide variety of disciplines and all have distinct missions. The first impact was the change to working remotely and the various hours that the workday shifted to. All of the dynamics of telecommuting changed how we work, where we work, and what times we work at. You fold in here as well the complete lack of business travel and in-person meetings, conferences, trade shows. I saw that often this opened up time for people to perform research and R&D and analytics and do some evaluation of publication activities. Secondly, there was a challenge of implementing changes already in motion and evolving with those changes inside of that COVID-19 bubble. That includes the workplace and locations and lack of face-to-face meetings, but also the differences in available resources and the differences in being able to reach out to colleagues, et cetera. These include a large growth in preprints, obviously the significant increase there around the COVID-19 publication data, but also the funder mandates that were already in motion and the overall growth of open access publication in the industry itself. And then finally, there's of course the fiscal component and the aftermath to what we've experienced. Revenues would likely be down, and so often people were looking at ways to reduce expenses. This included things like finding ways to reduce operational costs by automating tasks, preparing for pricing pressure from customers, vendors, and suppliers, and thinking about what the long-term business impact would be to COVID-19, whether it be subscription sales, publication output volume, shift to preprint, shift to OA, lots of all kinds of sort of rationalization happening based on the financial impact of COVID-19, worldwide travel, and the long-lasting worldwide impact. So how Dimensions has been involved in this conversation generally is to help inform editorial and collection development, which we'll dig into a little bit in this presentation as well, but using data to sort of inform what might be good places and areas to publish in. And then of course, using the data in Dimensions to support transitional negotiations, understand the growth of OA and how you as a publisher or as a portfolio of journals fit into that and give you tools to help you really sort of analyze and be in a position of strength. Of course, with some of this additional time that you might have had available to you in terms of at-home meeting space, et cetera, you might have time now to do some metrics analysis, looking at the performance of your journals, scorecarding them against competitors, and then looking at rejected article tracking and seeing if there are opportunities for improving your submission analysis and evaluation process. And then, of course, underpinning everything in Dimensions is the significant researcher database that connects all of the researchers to all the publications, as well as the funding grants, so that you can find and recruit authors to support all of these different enterprises. So a little bit of backstory and context for what Dimensions is as we launch into some of these very specific use cases. Dimensions is an aggregated database of a variety of different data sources, all pulled into one data model and cleaned up and organized so that we could explore all of the linkages between all of the different data types. So we're talking 118 million publications, 630,000 clinical trials, 136 million patents, 583,000 policy documents, 5.8 million grants that represent 1.7 trillion US dollars in funding, and 8.3 million data sets, essentially supplementary data. So we could really connect funding to publication, to supplementary data associated with that publication, the full record, and then of course understanding both the citation and alt-metric attention those particular publications have gotten, but also longer range impact. Things like, were they mentioned or cited by clinical trials? Were they mentioned or cited by patents? were they mentioned or cited by policy documents further downstream, and really understand that long-range impact, short-range and long-range impact of research. And of course, the technology behind that is easy to gloss over, but let's talk a little bit about how we take that data and not only normalize it so that it can be in one database and be explored usefully, but also how we enrich that. And a couple of key things that we'll talk about in terms of that area is disambiguation. So we do a lot of work around people disambiguation in terms of researchers and authors, a lot of work around institutional disambiguation, so we understand exactly where research activity is happening, and then of course funder disambiguation, so we can understand exactly which funders have funded the research that resulted in the publication output. And then we also do a considerable amount of work around analyzing the documents that we receive within Dimensions to understand the concepts that are related to that particular item, and we score them on relevancy. And then we use that to help us classify those documents to a variety of different taxonomies, everything from a traditional subject area classification taxonomy like fields of research to things that are a little bit more esoteric like the UN Sustainable Development Goal categories. So all of that is represented within the Dimensions platform as enrichment along the lines of the data itself. So the way that we package up the Dimensions database and sell that in different products into the segment are first as a web application, which is really the easiest to use, intuitive web-based application that anyone can use to really dig into the data in Dimensions and isolate very significant and insightful amounts of data around people, around funding, around publication activity, et cetera. And we'll show you some specific use cases around that today. But then we also have a robust API, which allows you to really interact with the Dimensions data from a machine-to-machine perspective. An example of that might be a manuscript submission system talking directly to Dimensions when a manuscript is received, saying, hey, tell me what you know about all of these authors on this paper I've just received. Where have they published before? How many citations have they had? What subject areas do they focus on, et cetera? And then sort of use that to sort of help inform that, that submission analysis. We also, as of recently, have made all of the Dimensions data available on Google BigQuery on the Google Cloud platform. And this is a really powerful way to be able to integrate Dimensions data in a really seamless way into dashboarding and reports alongside of your own data so that you can really provide useful information, useful sort of visualizations to your non-analytic, non-technical folks. So imagine a report for an editorial team that's very specific to the performance of their journal, or a report to a sales team that's very specific to activity in their territory around institutional funding and institutional research. So those kinds of things are really sort of fundamental to being able to generate dynamic and easy to consume, easy to use, powerful reporting. And then of course, we also provide the entirety of the Dimensions database as a bulk data feed via JSON files, which of course is for publishers that have a significant amount of infrastructure, their own data warehouse, their own data lake system, where they can take in that data through an ETL workflow and then generate their own dashboarding and reports based on all of the data in that data warehouse that they've invested in. So the first example of one of the things you can use Dimensions for, we'll talk about today, is essentially building your own special issue pipeline. And to do this, what we're going to do is essentially look at a specific journal. Let's say you're responsible for a journal. In this case, I've chosen Science just as an example. And you can quickly analyze exactly what subject area and topical coverage you typically publish in. So this journal typically focuses on biological sciences, medical and health sciences, earth sciences, et cetera. So represented by that bar chart there. And that really gives you that foundation to say, okay, what can Dimensions tell me about rising stars, emerging topics, and what kinds of funding is happening in these types of areas to say, hey, within medical and health sciences, here's an area you should focus on and build a special issue pipeline around because it is a growing area and you should take a look further into it. So quickly you can pivot from looking at that publication activity to looking at funding activity and say, okay, within medical and health sciences, where is the money? Where is it really being funded? And quickly you can see that the vast majority of funding within medical and health sciences, and this funding, by the way, is ongoing. So it's current funding, most likely hasn't had any research output from it quite yet. So it's still in that sort of current phase of research. So it's a really great area to sort of get in front of the curve and understand where activity might be going here, where need might be happening. But you can quickly and easily see that public health and health services is the lion's share growth area within medical and health sciences. So you can kind of understand exactly what subtopic within medical and health sciences is a great area to explore in terms of trying to build out a little bit of that special issue pipeline and understanding where are those hotspots? What subject areas are, is the funding really happening in now compared to 10 years ago? and what can I do within public health and health sciences to dig into a specific topic to put into my special issue. So dimensions can offer you things like the top co-occurring concepts or keywords within funding in public health and health services, and you can try to identify what terms might be appearing more and more in terms of co-occurring. So you might look at a specific field and you'll see that there's a significant amount of co-occurring concepts in an area, topic that might be very interesting for a special issue. So just digging into that by looking and exploring further into the public health and health services funding is a great way to build that sort of pipeline. And so this example I'm showing here is sort of reviewing metrics such as alternative metrics or alt metric to see which publications in that subtopic might be popping right now. So in this case, I'm looking specifically at publications in public health and health services, which we've identified as a growing area in medical and health sciences funding. I'm looking at publications from last year and thus far this year, and I'm looking very specifically at the overall altmetric attention score to identify what topics these top papers have that I might want to mine for my special issue pipeline. So everything from COVID-19, but subtopics within COVID-19, from psychology related to COVID-19 to long-term logistical impacts of COVID-19. You can really dig into this by looking at which ones have the most currency altmetric attention as a one input into what things might be really sort of emerging trends. So the next area we'll look at will be sort of the ability to do metrics analysis, and then I'll also look at rejected article tracking and understanding what's happening to articles that you didn't accept at submission. So this first view is showing how easy it is to analyze metrics performance on your journal, a collection of journals, or even competitors. And in this case, I'm looking at the BMJ, and you can see that you see a fairly traditional organic growth of citations year over year that the BMJ journal has received, starting in 2011 through 2019. But then you see a big pop, 2019 to 2020. And this gives you a great indicator to sort of dig into why that case might be. Is it related to COVID-19 sort of uptick in usage of medical research? Or is it based on an increase in overall number of publications? Or is it based on quality editorial submission analysis? So you can use this data, of course, to find what's really working well in your editorial decision workflow and what might need improvement, what things you might analyze to change perhaps aims and scope, change that editorial submission and analysis and workflow, change what things you're looking for, because this way you could tell what really worked and what might not have really worked by even looking at that total number of publications that received citations in 2020 and see what sort of characteristics you can identify there. So in addition to that, you can use wildcard-based searching, and you can see what I've done here is I've looked at a specific term, peer-to-peer contact tracing with an asterisk, so looking at a wildcard to try and identify a title of a submission you might have rejected in the past, and using that wildcard, takes into consideration that oftentimes the final publication might have a slightly different title than the submission itself, and then leveraging the fact that we've got corresponding author data and dimensions, I'm able to do a quick search looking for this particular submission, including the wildcard and the corresponding author, and quickly identify what happened to this article that I rejected. And I can see here that it was eventually submitted as a preprint to JMIR and then eventually published as a peer-reviewed publication by JMIR. And what's really cool here is you can identify, was it ever submitted as a preprint? Was it ever eventually published? What journal was it published in? What publisher sort of managed that? Do those journals compare to your journal? Like, why would they have accepted this when you didn't? And of course, the main thing to keep in mind here is, can you look at what the impact is? How many citations has it received so far? What kind of altmetric attention score does it have? Does it even have some early indications of long-term impact in terms of impact to clinical trials or impact to patents or policy documents? So it really gives you that ability to take a look here. And again, what's working and what might need improvement within your overall editorial submission analysis, and say, hey, we've missed out on some really good high-impact articles. Let's tweak this so we can kind of see the characteristics of these that really work. And let's take a look at ones that were never eventually published and say, hey, we're doing a really good job. So let's focus and make sure that we've got that same level of detail going forward. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit and talk about publication output reporting. And essentially, what I've done within just a few clicks, I've generated a chart of year-over-year publication output for the University of California system. And of course, you can do this for any individual institution, any system of institutions, any geographies, countrywide geography, or even multi-countrywide territories, et cetera. And then of course, consortia. You can build those lists and dimensions and be able to look at publication output year over year from researchers at those institutions, and really give you a great way to say, hey, I know exactly how many publications you output in terms of, in terms of research papers from 2015 to 2020. Pretty easy to calculate that. And of course, then you can combine this with other filtering tools, like looking specifically at the subject area of your specific journals or your specific publications. And you're looking at that at the publication level, so you can aggregate that up and really understand, here's how many published articles came from the University of California system in subject area X, and really sort of build that data set that you need to really sort of inform and evaluate transactional deals. And of course, because we do disambiguate authors in our workflow, you can also then narrow this down to say, I only want to see articles output from corresponding authors affiliated to institutions in the University of California system, and even narrow that universe down even further to the author that typically was paying the APC if it was open access. And of course, you can easily pivot that to look at how do those match up in terms of overall total volume, but look at open access versus closed or behind a subscription publication. Of course, you could add that into that filter and say, I only want to see things that were published closed, because that's really the transition that I'm doing here, is transitioning from things that were historically published in closed journals to things that I'm going to pivot to an open access journal that I'm launching or that I'm changing course on. But of course, you can look at this just landscape-wide too and say, hey, how many of the publications from the University of California system over the last 10 years were published OA versus not OA, and how's that changed over time? Of course, you can also look and see exactly where these were published. So not only can you see the aggregate volume, but you could take a look and say, okay, in 2020, I see that there's X amount that were published open access. Who was publishing those? What journals were they published in, and what publishers were handling those? And of course, then what funders funded the projects that were researched at the University of California system that either resulted in a closed or an OA publication. So really all of the data that you need to be very successful and informed in any sort of transitional conversation. And then I mentioned this earlier, but underpinning all of what we've got in dimensions is the author, researcher, and people disambiguation, people identification. So really being able to identify those individuals within the system that really match what you're looking for. So in this case, looking at that special issue pipeline, I can easily see and isolate a pool of potential authors based on that pipeline, based on the same criteria I determined the topic should be in. I can look at who's published in that topic or who's funded in that topic, how much funding they have, how long they're funded for, and how qualified they would be. And of course, I can just export this data directly out of Dimensions, and I've got myself a list of the top 100 or top 500 researchers who have funding in this particular area that I want to be targeting for my special issue that I've identified I want to publish in this particular topic. It's a really easy way to get to the people that you need to market to, that you need to recruit, and that you need to be speaking to in terms of submissions. And then of course, the same case applies to looking at that institutional output view that we were just looking at for transitional agreements and analysis. You can easily look at that same data set that we were looking at and identify who it was that actually published in those papers that were coming from that institution. And of course, you could filter that down to say, just show me only researchers that are at that system or researchers that are corresponding authors in those papers itself. So you can really sort of dig into that, see what citations they have, what kind of metrics Dimensions knows about them, and again, export this as a list of total researchers who have published in this particular system and what happened to their papers that they published. So with that, I wanted to take the opportunity to really thank you for your time, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your SSP 2021 virtual conference, which is charting a new course. And I hope that my talk today fit into that, which is really about charting a new course, but understanding a little bit about the chaos of the last 15 months, but how does that really result in transformation and innovation? If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the Digital Science Publisher team. That email address is publishers@digitalscience.com. And again, my email address is t.roos@digitalscience.com. Happy to engage in any sort of creative discussion and show you even more about Dimensions. So thank you again and have a great day.